Chapter 5. 2 days after Billie blasted the last alien into space, Bueller picked up radio transmissions. The signals were on the military band and coded, so they didn't know what was being said. But from the strength, they had to be close. Unfortunately, the ship did not have any transmitters they could use, only receivers. It didn't take Wilks long to figure out where the signals originated.
"Hello,"
he said.
"Looky here."
Billie leaned over his shoulder as Wilks played with the computer screen.
"Got us a planetoid. Not much bigger than a moon, but in direct orbit around the local primary. Been on the opposite side of the sun from us pretty much since we left the chambers. That's why we couldn't see it."
Numbers crawled up the screen. Wilks did something and the tiny blotch expanded and took on a roughly spherical shape, overlaid with grid lines. "Colonial Marine Base?" Bueller said.
"Yeah, that'd be my guess. Inflate a few pressure domes, pump them full of breathable, bury a couple of gravity generators, and you got all the comforts of home. Provided you grew up in a barracks. Military has hundreds of these bases scattered around the galaxy. Or did have."
"Is that where we're going?" Billie asked.
"I don't see anywhere else, kid. If these crappy rangefinders can be believed, we'll be there in a couple more days."
The three of them stared at the computer-augmented image. Billie wondered if they were thinking the same thing she was. Was this a place of refuge? Or were they leaping from the frying pan into the fire? It looked as if they were going to find out soon. These damned gravity drives were something, Wilks had to admit. They were moving at speeds the old reaction ships couldn't touch. As they approached the planetoid, it was about the same size as Terra's moon. The constant drone of the engines shut down. The ship turned and began to retro, slowing their descent toward the only sizable chunk of real estate around for 150 million clicks. There was some rumble from the rockets, but compared to the thrum of the gravity drives, the ship was quiet. He had tuned the vibrations out, but now that they were still, he missed them.
"Might as well use what water we have left to clean up," Wilks said. "We want to look good for the party."
"Yeah, especially since they aren't expecting company," Billie said. He shrugged. Despite his banter, Wilks was nervous. They were a long way from what any of them knew as home. Their reception was questionable. The ship fell toward the tiny planet. The gravity increased as the military industrial strength generators on the base enveloped them in their fields. Bueller shut off the ship's faux G, and it got a little more comfortable. The landing was rough. The ship fell straight in on its tail, the retros firing. Apparently, it navigated some kind of gigantic hatched roof and wound up in a bay. The ship vibrated as compressors pumped air into the bay. When there was enough atmosphere, they could hear the machinery. His back was still pretty tender, but Wilks could walk on his own. Bueller rode in his cradle, strapped to a wheeled hand truck Billie had found. The aft cargo bay registered breathable air, and the 3 passengers made their way into it as the loading ramp was lowered from outside. The hydraulics whined as the back of the ship yawned wide and the ramp grated to a halt. It was cold, but the air felt fresher than what they'd been used to. A quad of Colonial Marines in combat gear stood there, carbines held ready. At the side of them, the 4 Marines snapped their carbines up. Behind them, an officer sat in an electric cart, a fat cigar stuck in his mouth. He wore duty fatigues, and the gold braid on his visored cap identified him as a light general, a brigadier.
"At ease,"
the general yelled. He stepped from the cart. He was medium height, but powerfully built, with the body of a weightlifter. He wore an Opchand command headset, the bone phone and mouthpiece a single sculptured unit. He had an antique stainless 10mm auto pistol with full Santoprene grips in a hip holster. The sleeves of his fatigues were rolled up to reveal several tattoos on his forearms. On the left, a rampant screaming eagle and chains. On the right, the Colonial Marine emblem and a dagger and banner. A rainbow holopatch shimmering on his left breast said, "T. Spears." The general moved to stand in front of them.
"I didn't expect to see you ambulatory,"
he said. Wilks blinked. Nobody knew they were on the ship. If the general was expecting to see somebody not ambulatory, then he had to know about the human cargo.
If you're talking about the 4 people in the freezers, that isn't us, Wilks said. Sir.
The general raised one bushy eyebrow.
Say what, Marine? Download it. We just came along for the ride, Wilks said.
The general nodded.
All right.
To the Marines standing by, he said,
Maxwell, Dowling, go check on the cargo.
If you're talking about the 4 men in the sleep chambers, you're wasting your time, Billie said. They were infected by aliens. Billie wasn't slow. Wilks realized she also understood what the officer meant.
Were infected?
The aliens ate their way out. The men are dead. Wilks could see the general didn't care a lizard's ass about the men. The general frowned.
What about the aliens?
Before Wilks could stop her, Billie said, We killed them. The general's jaw muscles bunched. Wilks thought he was going to bite his cigar in half.
What? You killed my specimens?
It was Billie's turn to blink. Your specimens? It was them or us, Bueller put in. The general stared down at Bueller.
Listen, Vatscat. I've got a base full of people. I don't need any more. What I needed were those Terran-bred specimens. I needed to have my R&D people studying possible mutations. There's a war on Mister, in case you haven't heard. You just fouled up a Priority 1 mission. I could have you shot for that.
Wilks stared at the general. He pulled the cigar from his mouth, tapped ash from it.
Put these 3 in ISOMED and scan them, he said. Maybe they're infected and trying to hide it. We might salvage something yet.
He tapped the command headset.
Powell, get down here. We got a snafu.
The barrel of the carbine jabbed Wilks in his tender back. He fought the urge to spin and smash the Marine who'd prodded him. He managed to keep a grip on himself. No point in getting blasted by one of his own after coming all this way. He'd go along. Maybe later he could figure out what the hell was what. One of the Marines pushed Bueller's carriage. The other kept his weapon trained on Billie and Wilks. Billie didn't understand what was going on. They went down a descending corridor. When they rounded the end, they were on the edge of a large room. Billie gasped. Against the far wall was a row of clear cylinders. The 6 tubes were 4 meters tall, perhaps 2.5 meters in circumference. There was some kind of pale, bluish, transparent liquid in the containers. Each of the cylinders contained a full-size alien drone. Billie found that she was digging her fingers into Wilks's arm.
Jesus,
Wilks said. The Marine with the carbine pointed at him said,
Not to worry, Sarge. Those babies are in suspension. That's fluoropolymer fluid. They're alive, but they ain't going anywhere.
Billie saw a dozen smaller containers lined up on a long table nearby. Each of those had one of the crab-like alien hatchlings in it, ovipositors drooping limply under the finger bone-like jointed legs. Several techs in osmotic clean suits stood or sat at the table. Billie, who had spent years in hospitals, recognized microscopes, surgical lasers, autoclaves, and other medical impedimenta. Billie felt a wave of nausea. They were doing research on the aliens. Why? To learn how to kill them better? That had to be it, didn't it? Why else would they be doing it?